Hi, I'm Gregory Luce with the Adoptee Rights Law Center, and this will be a presentation on FOIA and intercountry adoptees, how to get your own U.S. immigration records. I am with the Adoptee Rights Law Center, where I represent domestic and intercountry adoptees on issues of identity, citizenship, and I also advocate across the U.S. on issues related to the rights of adult adopted people. First, what records are we talking about when we say let's get our own immigration records? Well, you may have personal records already. Sometimes they're given to you by adoptive parents. Your adoptive parents may have those records as well. If not, that's partially why we're here, to figure out how to request and obtain your own immigration records. There are also judicial records, court records, if the intercountry adoption was finalized in a U.S. state court. There are adoption agency records, and access to those will vary by agency and state law. Generally, I've found it fairly easy to get those records for intercountry adoptees, but not always and not in all states. And then you've got USCIS, or immigration records. It's the largest, probably the largest batch of records available to you upon request. And that's what this presentation is about. There are also, and I'll talk briefly about these U.S. Department of State records, as well as U.S. Customs and Border Protection records related to entry into the U.S. A few acronyms that you may hear as I throw them around. FOIA is FOIA, is Freedom of Information Act. USCIS is the U.S. Immigration and Citizenship Services. CBP and DOS are U.S. Customs and Border Protection and U.S. Department of State. There is a site online, dhs.gov/terms, that'll go through many of these acronyms because sometimes they can get a little confusing as to which ones apply to which agency. The primary repository of records for intercountry adoptees are essentially three different U.S. federal agencies. The biggest one is USCIS, or the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So those will have all the records related to an intercountry adoptee's immigration to the U.S. and potentially the adoption if the adoption occurred overseas. There's also the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and this relates to inspection and entry into the U.S. That's typically what's called an I-94 record. And then the Department of State, which has passport application records and other may have visa related records as well, although the visa records are typically within USCIS. We're going to be talking about a FOIA request for the USCIS A file, or the alien registration file. So that's the one we're talking about. And these are the basic documents on file with USCIS. Immigration records, of course. There may be adoption related records. So if there is an adoption or guardianship proceeding in the country of origin, those should be in the immigration records as well. Sometimes there are birth records. Sometimes it's not a birth record, but a certificate of abandonment. And sometimes the birth records are removed or redacted. And so that's something to look out for as you get the records from USCIS returned to you. There are also translated documents if the intercountry adoption occurred in a country in which the primary language is not English. And there are a whole host of other records, which could include home studies on the adopted parents, tax returns, and state-based approval of adoptions. There are three general ways to make a FOIA request to USCIS. Either a simple email request, a paper form that you mail in, or online via the FIRST portal. You only need two things to make a FOIA request. One, it has to be written, and two, it has to describe the records you're seeking. So you could easily do that through email, but I don't recommend it because it just becomes a much harder process to get it into the right place and to get USCIS to respond to the email request. Same kind of goes for a paper form, which is the G639. You can mail that in, but it's going to take more time to process that because they generally just turn it into an online portal and then mail you the information that you can then request. We're going to talk about online via the website first.uscis.gov. To use the first USCIS process, you need to first create a USCIS account. You can do that at uscis.gov, and there are links in the upper right related to signing in or creating an account. So you're going to want to sign up and create an account. To create an account, you're going to need a valid email address. You need to answer some security questions, verify your email address, and the USCIS uses an authenticator app or uses secondary verification like text or email. So you're going to need some patience in applying for an account, but it is worth it because it's much easier to request your records through the my.uscis.gov site. There is a video available, and you have the link there.
The Freedom of Information Act, also called...
And the video provides a quick overview of the online FIRST system, which is the system the USCIS uses for FOIA requests. And the link to the video is there. Once you sign in and you're making a request for yourself, you're not making a request for someone else, you begin to fill out the form that you need to fill out online in order to request your records. It's fairly straightforward. You're going to be making a Freedom of Information Act request. And so that's the checkbox here. You can, it's optional to put what you want the records for. You don't have to put anything in there. I typically, as an attorney, I say I need them for legal representation and advice, but you could just say that you want them for your personal records. Your current full name, any other names you've used in the past, that includes your birth name if it's different from your current legal name. And down here, it was the full name of the subject of record at the time of entry into the United States. That's typically your birth name, unless it was changed in the country of origin through adoption. But make sure this name is in there because that's often how the names are indexed. It's indexed by your name when you entered the country. Again, fairly straightforward information, your country of birth and your date of birth. This asks for any number of petition requests or receipts. I typically ignore these unless I am absolutely sure I know what the A number or the alien registration number is. If you're not sure about it, leave it blank. If you are sure about your A number, fill that in. It should make the process go a little bit faster. It will ask about information about family members that may appear on requested records. Unless you're looking for records related to a sibling, I leave that blank. Instead, make sure you put your parents' names, and that's your adoptive parents' names, in for your father and your mother, including your maiden name of your mother if she has one. Again, easy contact information. Make sure it's your current address, phone number, and daytime phone number. It should auto-populate your email, but if it doesn't, put an email in there that you can be notified of the records requests and their answer. This is probably the most important and most confusing part for people. It's what you are actually requesting. And there's a whole list of forms you can request and records you can request. If you request one of these sort of the listed documents, that's all you're going to get. And you're going to miss out on getting your entire file. So you want to scroll down and choose alien file. That's what you're obtaining. It's your entire immigration record on file with the USCIS. When you select that, it should go here on the right. And then when you press next, it's asking you to acknowledge that it's going to take a lot more time to get your A file because it just takes more time to get all the records instead of one specific record. So acknowledge that. Click that, and then you likely will not have any of these circumstances unless you're in immigration court proceedings or there's an emergency and you need the records right away. So that's going to be no checkboxes here and typically a no here. This is where you sign, and you're basically going to just type in your name and the date and then submit the request. Once you do, when you go back, you'll get an what's called an NRC number, or a National Record Center number. And when you go back, you can always check on the status. So this is what the screen should look like when you sign back in, and it will have where your request is in the queue and the status and an estimated completion date. Once it is complete, you can click on Document Library, and then you're going to get a list of the records that are available for download. That includes the responsive record. Those are essentially the A file. A partial denial, which means there may be redactions, which typically there are. And then there's the acknowledgement letter when you first filed the request. What if you get nothing? And that happens. They just didn't find a record under the name that was listed on the request. There's a couple of things you can do. Make sure you didn't make any mistakes on filling out the form, and you sometimes put the first name where the last name goes into the form, or some other misspelling. So make sure that's correct. If you find something that was incorrect, you can always send and submit additional information. There's a email down here where you can try to resolve it without having to refile it completely again. If through that you still can't find any records, I think you need to determine why. And that's always a hard thing to determine. You may need to have some important conversations with adoptive parents to determine what was done to secure your citizenship or your immigration, and determine what kind of visa you entered the country on. And hopefully it was an immigrant visa and not a tourist visa, because if it's a tourist visa, there will be no A file because you were not considered an immigrant. And then also consider a FOIA with other agencies if you can't find any USCIS records. And that includes the basic documents on U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and documents on file with the Department of State. That's typically passport applications. That's it. It should be fairly straightforward to make the request online, especially using this video to help you through it. And it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get the records returned to you, and they would be available online when you sign into the USCIS portal to retrieve those records. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out at greg@adopteerightslaw.com. I limit my representation to adoptees only, adult adoptees who are either domestically born or intercountry adoptees who have issues with U.S. citizenship or other identity issues. Thanks.